this shiur to you. Yes. There you go. So you have to listen. I titled it Stations and Destinations this year. We're in Parashat Vayechi. We're about to finish Sefer Bereshit once again. And we are going into exile. And in exile there are many stations, but there is no destination. This is the destination. There's only one destination. However comfortable a station may be, there's only one destination for the Jewish people. And we're going to see a number of approaches here to getting through exile. Are you grandma? Your grandma? And your mum? Oh, nice. Lovely. We're going to start off with Rabbi Yoni Grossman, okay? And a very interesting point that he notes with regards to Yosef, and then we're going to go into Ephraim and Menashe. Some really, really poignant comments. First from Rabbi Sachs, and then from the MS Yaakov, and then from me. Rav Grossman starts off, Shelo kamo Yaakov, as opposed to Yaakov, two people die in this week's parsha, two very important people. One is Yaakov, and one is Yosef. אבל שלא כמו יעקב, as opposed to Yaakov, גופתו של יוסף מושמט בארון. Yosef is placed in a coffin. Remember, Yaakov was taken straight to Israel, and he was buried in Hebron, in Marat HaMachpelah. But Yosef is put in a coffin because Yosef was buried in Egypt. שלא כמו יעקב הנודד לקנען ונקבר שם, as opposed to Yaakov, who was taken to Israel and buried in Israel. נתון אגבי זה דרמטי יותר ממה שנדמה מבפת ראשון. This is actually more dramatical than it initially appears. Who cares? מפני שארונות הקבורה המצרים הם אחד מסמלי תפארתם, because in Egyptian culture, the way that they are buried is very significant. It's a status symbol in Egypt. Ein od izkur shel kvura ba'aron b'mikra. There is no other coffin burial in all of Tanakh. Aval b'Mitzrayim nafos eicher me'alef hashlishi, from the 3rd century in Egypt, haminhag likvor et haniftar ba'aron asui eitz. They used to bury people in coffins made of wood, cheres or pottery or matechet or metal. They invested a lot in the way they buried people because of their hashkafa regarding death. It is a transport to another world. And therefore they saw it as kavod lamet, the way they be buried. It's also fair to assume that the Egyptians wanted to honor the prime minister of Egypt who had saved them. He'd saved them from starvation. And therefore they invested a lot in his burial. But let's put it in other words. At the beginning, Yosef was buried as an Egyptian, the Aron Kvura Mitzri, in an Egyptian way, in Egypt. There is an argument, a very interesting argument in Bereshit Rabbah in the Mishnah. Who embalmed Yosef's body? They used to embalm the body so that it wouldn't decay. They embalmed him. Who prepared Yosef's body after he died? Rabbi Pinchas, Rabbi Yehuda, B'Shem Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rofim Chantu Oto. He said the doctors, the Egyptian doctors, they embalmed the body. Rabbi Pinchas Amar Shvatim Chantu Oto. No, the brothers, they prepared the body. Hadahu Dichtiv Yachantu Otam Yasem Barom B'Mitzram Umihem Ve'elu Shmo B'nei Yisrael. Machloket zol, this dispute, bear with me, this dispute, משקפת לאישורה את האווירה המורכבת שעולה בכתוב עצמו ביחס לעיצוב מות יוסף. We are trying to understand the framework in which Yosef died and where he was when he died. Who is Yosef? Is he an Egyptian? Is he a Jew? מי טיפל בגופת Yosef? Who did the tahara? כלומר, למי הוא שייך? Who does he belong to? He's our prime minister, he's our brother. האם הרופאים המצרים חונטים אותו והמלכות המצרית מטפלת בגופתו? Is his body dealt with by the Egyptian doctors and by the Egyptian government? או שמא בני משפחתו הם אלו שמטפלים בגופתו? You might think, who cares? דומה שלא במקרה שותק הכתוב ולא אומר בפירוש מי הם חונטים. It's very unclear from the psukim who is actually responsible here. Who buries Yosef? סביר כמובן שאלו הם הרופאים המצרים המטפלים בגופת יוסף. It makes a lot of sense, and that's what the Ibn Ezra says, that they were Egyptian doctors. He's an Egyptian leader. So Egyptian doctors looked after the body. וכנראה לא רק רופאים, אלא חונטים רשמיים, שזה מקצועם. Professional embalmers, if you know what embalmment is, it means it keeps the body in place. The body doesn't decay. A body decays very, very quickly after we die. Very, very quickly. Thus, Shalom Neda, the problem with identifying many of those killed at the beginning of this war was because their bodies were lying in fields. And by the time we got to deal with their bodies, they were crawling with worms. You couldn't recognize bodies. You couldn't recognize bodies. They were absolutely, in fact, I was doing this with Chevra Kadisha, and Chevra Kadisha never seen bodies like this. Normally when a person dies, it's put into a freezer, and the body freezes straight away. It stops the body decaying until at least after the funeral. When a body's been lying in a field or under a bush on the way to Gaza for 2 weeks, so obviously it doesn't look like that. And therefore, the difficulty in identifying bodies the longer they've been left alone. And Baruch Hashem, there is DNA today. There always was DNA, but they can check through DNA how to identify a body. The Egyptians wanted to preserve the body, the physical body. That's why they embalmed the body. אולם הכתוב שותק ולא מבליט זאת כדי לאפשר לקרוא את זהותו כזהות עברית לכל דבר. So Rav Yonatan Grossman wants to suggest that the pasuk does not identify who actually dealt with the body, because we don't want to totally associate Joseph with an Egyptian culture, because he wasn't Egyptian. במובן מסוים יוסף זוכה לשתי קבורות. To a certain degree, and this is where it starts to get interesting, Yosef was buried twice. Now you know that Yosef was buried twice. At the beginning, when he died at the age of 110, he was buried in an Egyptian coffin in Egypt. He probably has this Egyptian patterns on his coffin. This is after they prepared him as they would an Egyptian over the page. במצרים. אפשר להניח שעל קברו המצרי נכתב פה נטמן ספנת פנח. Joseph's name in Egypt was Sofnat Paneach. So it probably even said that on his coffin. Here it is buried, Sofnat Paneach. Ulam ka'avud, Yetziat Mitzrayim, when we came out of Egypt, et arono Yosef u'ma'alim et atzmotav lechnan. This is a very interesting deal. When we bring Joseph out of Egypt, the pasuk says they took his bones out of Egypt, not the coffin. Jews aren't buried in the coffin. Sometimes in Chutz La'aretz they have to bury you in the coffin because that's the law of the land. They make holes at the bottom of the coffin. They drill holes at the bottom of every Jewish coffin so that the body is always touching the ground. The body has to be touching the ground when it's buried. In Israel, we bury bodies unless the bodies are unburiable, then they're put in coffins. Soldiers are almost always buried in coffins, because they don't want to differentiate. They don't want the family to know how the soldier died and what was left of the soldier after whatever happened. So unless it's not an army funeral, a tzava funeral will always be with a coffin, always. It's lo klug. If a soldier, our cousin who got killed at the beginning of the war, he was buried not by the army, he was buried by the family, so he was buried just with tachrichin and buried directly into the ground. So Yosef is atzamot. The minhag in Israel always was, ladies, and you can see this if you ever go to a tour of the old city down by the Kotel. up by the Kotel, you will see that they used to put a body in a cave, and after a year, when the body had decayed, they would collect up the bones of the body, and they would put them in a certain area that was for that family within the cave. And that was called Isuf at Samot, Esof, to gather up. After a year, they would gather up the bones after the body had totally decayed. But Yosef's, there was no Aron of Yosef that we took to Israel. We took his bones to Israel because Jews are buried in their bodies. They're not buried in boxes. So it's a very distinct burial. His second burial is a Jewish burial. His first burial is an Egyptian burial. It's very significant. Yosef lo, I can't see the word here, hold on a second. Yosef lo, מבקש לעלות את ארונו אלא את עצמותיו. When Yosef asked the brothers to pass on his will is that not his coffin be taken to Israel, but that his bones be taken to Israel. שלד הגוף וחוט השדרה הפנימי, יוסף עצמו מתחת לבושים המצרים, ואכן את עצמות יוסף, the bones of Yosef לוקח משה עמו. Moshe takes the bones of Yosef. He has an Egyptian burial and a Jewish burial. When we leave Egypt, and Yosef will ultimately be buried in Shechem, and his bones will be buried in Shechem, not the coffin, his bones will be buried in Shechem. So go down, skip the middle piece, go down to the next paragraph. This atmosphere, this Egyptian atmosphere is part of his life. Remember that Joseph was an Egyptian prime minister. We're going to go into this a lot in a minute. Now, Rav Yoni Grossman goes into something which is absolutely mind-blowing. Egyptian culture, Jewish culture, we always say Ad Mea V'Esrim, until 120. Egyptian culture is Ad Mea V'Eser. Old Egyptian culture, not today's Muslim Egyptian. This wasn't Muslims. Muslims didn't exist then. Maybe their grandmas are older than the state of Israel, but their religion is much younger than ours, as is everything else, including our affiliation to the country. But nonetheless, so he says, as an academic rabbi, he says there's a great significance. The Apostle says he died at the age of 110, which is the age that Egyptians are meant to. He is totally associated with Egypt on the one hand, but he insists on being ultimately buried as a Jew. Yosef is a very interesting person for us. This is just an introduction to what I want to do today. But what's interesting about Yosef, ladies, is Yosef is a tzaddik. And I mentioned reasons over the last few weeks why Yosef is a tzaddik. He's a tzaddik because he's out there on his own, disowned by his family, and he remains totally loyal and committed to the Jewish belief on his own. He's a tzaddik because he forgives his brothers. He's a tzaddik because he remains Jewish in Galus. But even though, and he could be, I said this to my kids on Shabbos, he could be the prototype for a modern Orthodox Jew. Here is a Jew who goes into Manhattan and lives as a religious man in the middle of Manhattan. That's a prototype. However, isn't it interesting that when the Jews come down to join him in Egypt, he says, you're not going to live here with me, you're going to Goshen. Not Goshen in New Jersey, Goshen in Egypt, and you're going to build a Jewish ghetto. And only Jews are going to be in that ghetto. Meaning, Yosef says, I've lived this way all of my life. And there are ramifications to that. But you're not going to do that. I don't want you to work in Pharaoh's industries. I want you to say you're shepherds, because he won't hire you. And I want you to live alone in Goshen. Meaning, for a person who lived and survived as a religious Jew, in an irreligious atmosphere, he does not suggest that his children do this and that his brothers do this. But there was an influence on both of the children and an influence on Yosef. Turn over the page and we have two opposite essays, one by Rabbi Sachs and one by the Emes Yaakov, two very, very different Jewish thinkers. The Emes Yaakov was the Rav in Monsey for many, many years. But wasn't affiliated so much with modern Orthodoxy, and Rabbi Sachs certainly was. They are going to be blessed by Yaakov. The oldest son is who? He didn't have a son called He had a son called Menashe. I don't know why people think if you mumble it, it's like an answer. Menashe, and the other one was? Good, nice and clear. Ephraim, okay. Now the oldest one is Menashe, the second one is Ephraim. When Yosef comes with the two boys to Yaakov, Yaakov swaps his hands around, right? He says, Yisimcha Elohim ka'eh, Ephraim v'chem Menashe. You're doing it again, Dad? You're doing it again? You're choosing the little one over the big one? Didn't we go through a story now of devastation for 22 years because of that? Now, I want to tell you something else about the names. You just need this as an introduction to these essays, okay? When Yosef names his first son Menashe, it's a very bitter name. Ki nashani Elokim et Beit Avi. Because God has helped me forget my father's house. That's a pretty depressing comment. Yosef has made a new life in Egypt. He's married an Egyptian woman, and his son is called Menashe. Ki nashani Elokim et Beit Avi. God has helped me forget home. I built a new reality. Ephraim is a much more positive name. Ki hifrani Elokim. God has made me fruitful. Rabbi Sachs is gonna talk about the names, and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky is going to talk about the names in two separate ways, but at the end of the day, they're making the same point. Follow me into Rabbi Sachs. Join me with Rabbi Sachs. Dramata Achim, it really is good stuff, really. Dramata Achim HaTzeirim v'Habachorim shezara et Sefer Bereshit Kulo. Mikaim v'Hevel v'Elech. We have stories of brothers throughout the book of Bereshit. It's a shame to come to the end of Bereshit. There's just so much more to do. But we'll find things to do in Shemot too. But even in Vayikra, we'll find things to do. And in Bamidbar, and then you'll leave. But you're welcome to stay for Dvarim. And Bereshit again. And Shemot again. We get to the two children of Yosef. This is absolutely fascinating. Again, ladies, I'm sorry to be spoiling your Monday night, that you're not going to be able to do anything but just go over these sources for the whole evening. I apologize again for giving you free and good entertainment for your Monday evenings. Bless you. Bless her. Raimi, bless her. Okay. Menashe ve'Ephraim nirsham בפרק יוסף בסצנה היחידה בחומש בראשית שיש בה סבא נכדים. This is interesting. The only scene in all of Sefer Bereshit where you have a grandfather and his children actually present at the same place, at the same time, which is written. Yitzhak was around when Yosef was sold, but the apostle doesn't really talk about it. Yosef mevir banav lehiparech me'aviv Yisrael she'al eretz tavai. Yaakov is about to die, and Yosef brings his children. Okay, Yisrael saba mitakesh, and Grandpa is very stubborn, and he insists. Lamron hesberav shel, even though Yosef has explained, no, this is the oldest one. L'shakel et yadav, to swap his hands over, v'latet et yad yamino el rosh Ephraim, to put his right hand on Ephraim's head and to give him preference. Hatzair, and Yosef points it out, he says, Yadati b'ni yadati, I know what I'm doing. I'm not senile, I know what I'm doing. This isn't a mistake. Omer Yisrael al Menashe habachor, gam hu yeh la'am v'gam hu yigdal. Don't worry, Menashe will be a big boy. He will also succeed, but I want to give preference to Ephraim. V'ulam achiv ha'katan yigdal mimeno v'zaro yeh maleh goyim. His brother will be greater. Lo kasher להבין מדוע היה חשוב כל כך ליוסף שאביו יברך את בנו הבכור. It's not hard to understand why Yosef wanted to avoid friction here. I mean, Yosef suffered at the first hand of brotherly jealousy. Why? He wants to avoid this happening again. Shalosh פעמים הקדים יעקב שעיר לבכור. On 3 occasions, Yaakov gave the younger preference over the older. Tehillah, at the beginning, Tehillah, when he did it himself, when Kana et Bechorah me'achiv Esav, when he took the firstborn rights from his brother Esav. The second time when he took the brachot, then he preferred Rachel over Leah. ולבסוף כשביכה את פניו הסירים יוסף ובנימין על פני גדולים. And when in the end, when he preferred Joseph and Benjamin over the other brothers. התוצאות ידועות, and we know what the results were. The results were never good. They were never good. Esav hated him, Leah hated Rachel, Rachel hated Leah, however we want to interpret it. And we know what happens with Joseph and the brothers. הבריחה מעשיו ואימת המלחמה איתו, השיבוד הכפול ללבן, המתח בין הראיה האהובה לשנואה בו אל יעקב, ואסור מכירת יוסף. האם יעקב לא למד לקח? Yaakov didn't learn his lesson. He wants to swap over again. Again, he wants to show that the younger one is more important than the older one. האם הוא רוצה להוריש את הקללה הזו לדור נוסף? He wants to pass this curse on to another generation of favoritism, of competition. או שמא פשוט אין יודע שמנשה בכור. Does he not know that מנשה זה בכור? ובכל מקרה, מדוע העדיף היסד את אפרים? What point was he making by preferring Ephraim over Manasseh? So see what he says. You couldn't guess what he's going to say. התורה השאירה לנו, next paragraph, כבמקרים נוספים את מלאכת הפינוח. The Torah has left this open for us to work out. You're going to see one decision here and a totally different approach by Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. בכתוב אנו מוצאים דבר אחד שישראל ודאי ידע על נכדיו, את שמותיהם. There's one thing we know that Yaakov knew. He knew the names of his children. Names are very, very important. I don't know how much time your parents spent choosing your name, but we spent an incredible amount of time deliberating the names we would give our children. And in many of the cases with our children very, very much reflect the names we gave them. Very, very much reflect the names we gave them. There's a lot of Kabbalah with names, and obviously Hebrew names, and it's a very, very important thing. Yaakov stresses, he sees an emphasis on the names of the children. ייתכן שהשמות ומה שעומד מאחוריהם גרמו לו להעדיף את אפרים. Rabbi Sachs wants to suggest, again, it's not necessarily pshat, but the theme, ladies, is so important. He wants to suggest that what influenced Yaakov in preferring Ephraim was Ephraim's name. שכן בשמו פניו קודר יוסף את סיפור גלותו מבית יעקב. In the names of his children, Yosef is describing his exilic experience. כזכור, בני יוסף נולדו לו מאסנת בת פוטיפרה. His children were born to an Egyptian lady. לאחר שנתמנה משנה, and all of what happened in my father's house. ואת שם השני קרא אפרים, כי הפרני אלוקים בארץ עניי. Because God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. What he's going to say, let's see it outside and see it inside. He says, Ki nashani elokim et beit avi is not something that Yaakov's happy with that name. God has helped me forget my father's house. Is that what a Jew is going to do when he goes to Galut? He's going to forget his father's house. He's going to forget his father's house and have a tree and walk around saying happy holidays to people, celebrating a religion that must have killed millions upon millions of Jewish people as a result of this man that they celebrate. That's what's going to be. Ki nashani elokim et avi. He's helped me forget my father's house. God has made me fruitful. That's a positive. He wants to make a point. The way to survive in Galut is not by forgetting your father's house. And many people in America and England have just come to realize that even when you try and forget it, they will remind you. You try and forget it and they will remind you. So many unaffiliated Jews over the last few months have been reminded time and again who their Beit Avi is. They had forgotten their Beit Avi. They thought they belonged to a new culture and it was a new world, and they have suddenly discovered it's not a new world, it's the same old world. You tried to forget your father's house, they will remind you your father's house. They will remind you. Yaakov isn't happy with the name. You don't go to Galut and forget your father's house. That's not a good name. See what he says inside. בתמציתיות עילאית רומזת כאן התורה, second from last paragraph, לאופייה של חוויית הגלות בשני שלבים. There are two stages to our galut. It's always been the same. שעברו על יוסף בהיותו משנה למלך. That happened to Yosef when he was a prime minister. תחילה הוא חש הקלה. At the beginning he feels a release. Nashani Elokim, God has helped me forget something else, new horizons. He's not a slave, he's not a prisoner. He is a successful man in Chutz La'aretz. When he lived in Israel, he was part of a family, he was the youngest one. And now he's prime minister. God has released me from the shackles of my past. I'm second only to Pharaoh. There was a second to the President of America, a very good man who died just a week or two ago, Henry Kissinger, a Jew, a German Jew, second only to President Nixon, Minister of State of Foreign Affairs in America during the Yom Kippur War. He found himself negotiating for America with Israel. But Israel is Jews, America is not Jews. It's not a Jewish country. There may be Jews in the country, it's not a Jewish country. Now he's part of the greatest nation in the world. You heard this before? No one is going to remind him where he comes from. No one would dare say Joseph the Jew. No way. He's prime minister. He's in charge of the food. No one's going to call him a Jew. They won't have anything to eat. He inspires awe. He has Pharaoh's ring on his finger. He is a prince of Egypt. His past is forgotten. He is free of the shackles of the enslaved and attacked Jew. And that is what Menashe means. God has helped me forget my past. I'm on new horizons. But as time passes, he has emotions. It's true he's a prince. And he has fulfilled the dreams of his childhood. But he knows he's not an Egyptian. He's not an Egyptian. He's not. And that culture is not his culture. You might think it's his culture. It's not his culture. His family is, at the end of the day, he's still his family. It's still his family. God spoke to them. He didn't speak to the Egyptians. And that's what Ephraim, God has made me fruitful. He has brought me beyond that. When Yaakov, says Rabbi Sachs here, when Yaakov is blessing Yosef, Yaakov is saying to Yosef, the way to approach the exile is not kinashani Elokim. It's not to forget your past. It's not to deny your identity and pretend it doesn't exist. Number one, it won't work. It won't work. You can deny it and they will remind you. Whether you like it or not, they will remind you. But you can be there and be proud and lift your head up high, whether you're in a university in New York or Chicago or Michigan or wherever it may be. You lift your head up high as a Jew. Not kinashani Elokim et Beit Avi. You don't hide your Judaism. You don't have to cower in shock and avoid situations. You hide, you hold your flag. So they shout and scream. Let them shout, let them scream. You hold your head up high. Ephraim, not Menashe. Yaakov says, I bless Ephraim, not Menashe. I'll bless Menashe as well. But the derech of how to live in exile on that station, in that station where you go, is Ephraim, not Menashe. Not to deny your Judaism. Not to deny your Judaism. You know how many German Jews in the 30s thought they were only German? There's a shocking essay written by the Meshech Chochmah, Parshat Bechukotai. He came to visit, he came from the east to Germany. And he was shocked. He comes back. This is long before the Holocaust, years before the Holocaust. And he writes, there are Jews in Berlin who think that Berlin is Jerusalem. They have replaced Jerusalem with Berlin. And he goes into a shocking and devastating description of what happens to Jews who renounce their Judaism. In hindsight, it looks prophetic, but it's shocking in the way he talks about it. People, if you have to be there, you have to be there, but you don't lower your head. You don't take your kippah off. I'll go to Chutz La'aretz and I'll go and interview. I'm not taking my kippah off. If they want to hit me, they'll hit me. I lived for 23 years. I got hit. I got spat on. They threw money on the floor in front of me. I picked it up. They threw money on the floor because Jews pick it up. So I picked it up. Chabal, whatever. They started singing If I Were a Rich Man. They didn't even know the words. They couldn't even spell rich. The Chevra were throwing it on the floor. And rich is an easy word. They got stuck on the sequence. Is that an I or a Y? You lift your heads up. They call you a name. They call you a name. We were walking in Warsaw. Yeah, people sometimes shout things at you. A year or two ago, a guy comes up to me. I'm in the back of the girls, and he comes up to me, walking in Warsaw. We're walking towards the area, about to go on the bus. The guy comes up to me and he says to me, "You're a disgusting people." A poll tells me we're a disgusting people. Let's sit down and talk about it, and let me tell you what disgusting is. I've got a lot of things to say about Poland. I'm happy to sit down for 2-3 hours, 4 or 5 weeks, and explain to you what disgusting really is. And he says, you should come to this country. You're not welcome in this country. Just a lunatic, whatever. Anyway, I argued a bit because I just liked the situation. And at the end, he got so frustrated with me, he said to me, "Free Palestine." So I said, "Thanks, it's free. Thank you very much, it's free. But thank you for your good wishes." A very annoying smile, because that's the mitzvah, is to annoy. It's a very annoying smile. And I walked away and just told a few policemen there that this man was annoying us, so they went to talk to him. Whatever, let's stand up, proud. Ephraim, not Menashe, not Kinashani Elokim. I'm not hiding my identity. I'm not hiding. I've got more to say about this. We'll get there, and I won't go over time too much. Emet LeYaakov. Go to Emet LeYaakov. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky asks more questions. He asks, you know that Ephraim and Menashe replace who as a tribe? Who was a tribe that they replaced? Yosef. Good. We're getting louder. Yosef. Yosef turns into 2 tribes, Ephraim and Menashe, right? Ephraim and Menashe. Ephraim and Menashe, right? Are they always Ephraim and Menashe? The 12 tribes of Israel, is it always Ephraim and Menashe? No. No! Good. No. On the plate of the Kohen Gadol, it says Yehosef. It doesn't say Ephraim and Menashe. So when are Ephraim and Menashe tribes? In the Shvatim when? In the Nachalot. Have a look at this, ladies. This is genius. Miriam bows. Careful you don't kind of fall down when you hear this, because you're going to domino everyone down, okay? So look at this Emes Yaakov, ladies. Look at it inside. It is so good. I can see Yitti's seen it before because she's telling Sasha what he says. Don't tell her. We're really inside. She's telling you, don't tell her the end, because then she'll go. Okay, let Yittu. Okay. You can tell her in French because her French isn't so good. It's not as good as mine, So he goes back to the question of Rabbi Sachs. He asked the question before Rabbi Sachs. Everyone's asked this question. Why Ephraim and Menashe? And why? But he's going to ask a different question that Rabbi Sachs didn't ask. Because Rabbi Sachs asked, what about the favoritism in blessing Ephraim first? Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky asked a different question. Why are you blessing them at all? Did you bless any other grandchildren? What about Binyamin's children? What about Reuven's children? What about Yehuda's children? He didn't bless any other grandchildren. Why did he bless Ephraim and Menashe? And then why does he bless Ephraim first? So it's a double question. Rabbi Sachs was asking, why does he bless Ephraim before Menashe? And he gave his answer, okay, which is a nice drush. It really is a good drush. But Rabbi Yaakov is asking a better question. He doesn't bless any of the grandchildren. Why is he blessing Ephraim and Menashe? Ladies, you cut this out afterwards, you put it on your wall, okay? And you take it and then you frame it and you put it on your wall in university. Bar Ilan or Hebrew U, wherever. Just mentioning a few examples, okay? I told you at the beginning of the year you would eventually laugh. באמת קשה, איך לא יראה יעקב שיקפידו האחים שיברך בברכה מיוחדת את בני יוסף? מה שלא עשה לכל בניו. He didn't bless any other grandchildren, so why did he bless these grandchildren? Why? It's a good question, right? It is a good question. I'm going to tell you, I'm too excited to read it. I'm too excited. I have to tell you. And then if we have time, I'll read it. Okay, can I just... Okay. I'm too excited. I have to tell you. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says, and this is similar to Rabbi Sachs, but in a different way altogether. He says, as Yosef settled in Egypt, he was influenced by Egyptian culture. He says Menashe was forgetting his family's house, but Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky goes into a little suggestion here, which I don't know can be proven, but he wants to say that Ephraim is an Egyptian name. He says if you look at all the Egyptian names in the Torah, they all have a pei and a resh. Paro, Potiphera, Shifra, Sofnat Panach has a pei as well. And I'm not directing anyone, I have no idea, but as far as Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky is concerned, it's as if he called Ephraim Matthew. Matthew is a name from the New Testament. There are many good Jews with that name, right? But I have no idea, but Matthew is from the New Testament, as is Paul. I had a lot of good friends called Paul. Paul wasn't a friend of the Jewish people at all. Paul was probably the founder of Christianity as we know it, as opposed to Jesus. But Ephraim, as far as Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky is concerned, is an Egyptian name. Rav Yaakov says as follows. Listen to this. Rav Yaakov says that Yaakov is worried because these two grandchildren are different to all of the others. In what way? In what way? They've never seen the Holy Land. They've never been in Israel. They don't even know that they're in exile. They were born Egyptian. They were born into Egyptian culture. They never saw Eretz Israel. They don't know what Marat HaMachpelah is. They don't know what Yerushalayim is. They've never been here. They've never seen it. And they're going into exile, the other brothers, but they're in exile. They don't even know that they're in exile. They don't even know that they don't belong. And Yaakov knows that we're going into a slavery of 210 years, at least. Depending on how you understand the 400 years. We're going into a long period, and he's worried. What keeps a Jew going in Galut? What keeps you going in your station? Yerushalayim, that's what I said here a few days ago. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim, but if you don't know that Yerushalayim exists, how do you keep going? If you don't know it's there. If you actually believe one of those people who says that their grandmother's older than our country, how dare they? How dare they? The first Rashi and Bereshit told us, they will say, we've been since 3,500 years we've been in this country. 3,500 years. They weren't even born or thought of. Their religion wasn't thought of. Their religion is in diapers compared to our religion. How dare they? Their grandmother's older than our state. Big deal. Jews have been here for 3,500 years. It's in the Bible. Islam is based on the Bible. Christianity is based on the Bible. It's in the Bible. Read the Bible. It's the most well-read book in the world. 3,500 years we've been here. And there are Jews who've forgotten. And there are Jews who were brought up in come back. So what does he do? This is genius. He gives them a nachala in Israel. That's the only thing that distinguishes Ephraim and Menashe, is that they get a portion in the land of Israel. On plate, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, it says Yosef, not an Ephraim and Menashe. What distinguishes Ephraim and Menashe is that they get rights to Israel. Yaakov wants to connect them with Israel, to get them through the Galut. So why does he put Ephraim first? Because he thinks Ephraim is an Egyptian Jew. He's got an Egyptian name. So he's more worried about Ephraim than Menashe. Remember, Rashi said that when there was an interpreter between the brothers and Yosef, it was Menashe, because Menashe spoke Hebrew. Ephraim doesn't even speak Hebrew. He can't read the Aleph base. So Ephraim is brilliant. Ephraim comes first, brilliant. Ephraim comes first because, and then he does something which is so unbelievable, the way he connects Chazal up together. There is a Chazal, ladies. There is a Chazal where Chazal say that there are the dry bones that come to life in Yechezkel, right? In Yechezkel. And Chazal are trying to identify the dry bones. And one of the opinions in Chazal is that the dry bones, listen, is the tribe of Ephraim who tried to leave Egypt early and were killed. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, writing this after the Second World War, says these were Jews who were Egyptians, and as soon as the Egyptians made them slaves, they couldn't face it. So they tried to leave early and they were massacred, and they are the dry bones. And if you read what he says here, and you know your history, you'll know the amount of suicides in Germany between 1933 and 1938 of Germans who had fought in the First World War for Germany and who believed in Germany, and they were Germany before they were Jewish. And Hitler came and he took their citizenship away from them, and he took their jobs away from them, and so many committed suicide because they couldn't face it, because they had always seen themselves as Germans. They never saw themselves as Jews. And Hitler said, you can't mix with Germans, you can't work with Germans, you can't marry Germans. And many, many German Jews committed suicide. And I'm sure that's what he had in mind when he's describing this. Ephraim, they were so assimilated into Egypt. And the Egyptians said, you're not Egyptian, you go back, you're going to be slaves. They couldn't face it, so they tried to leave, but they are the dry bones with Ephraim. What an incredible message. If we're talking about stations and destinations, the Yaakov says, you need to know where your roots are. You need to know. One of the most exciting, I can't remember, there are some of you in here today, but one of the most exciting moments in interviewing is when I meet a girl who's never been to Israel before. And she ends up coming to me. I don't remember who, honestly, I don't remember who. I don't remember where they came. I don't remember anything. But I feel such an excitement when a girl tells me in an interview she's never been to Israel before. And it could be that I'm going to be held responsible for showing her our land. That this is our land. This is where we are. And Yaakov and Yosef aren't going to be buried in Egypt. They don't want Jews going to Uman. They don't want Jews going to the Baal Shem Tov. They want Jews, they're going to come to Israel. The roots are here. Every Jew needs to know that their roots are here. Ribono shel olam. They think we're 75 years in this country. Really? Really? Why don't they get educated? Why don't they read something which is objectively true? They really think we've been here for 75 years. The entire Bible is about Israel. The Bible is about Jewish people. It's not about Muhammad. Muhammad never even mentioned Jerusalem in the Quran. It's not even mentioned in the Quran. It's not even their holy site. I can learn some facts, at least. If you don't know them, go to the Thursday night program. You need to know the facts. Really? 75? Their grandma's older than our country? Do me a little. Give me that poster. Let me burn it. Let me rip it up. What a load of nonsense. We've been here for 3,500 years. This is our country. And Jews, I'm worried about the Jews. The Jews will say this to me, but they don't understand. They don't understand that this is our country. They don't understand this is where we're from. This has always been, you know, the BBC, they always talk about Temple Mount. Temple Mount, the Jews are going on to Temple Mount. Tell me something, Mr. BBC. Why is it called Temple? They call it Temple Mount and then say it belongs to us, but it's Temple Mount. It's a Beit Mikdash. It's Temple Mount. It's ours. And the remnants still stand there. That wasn't 75 years ago. That was 2,000 years ago. That was 2,000 years ago. That was before Jesus. What are you talking about? 1948, Avram was born in our years. 2023, in our years. He came to Israel. 2023, it's 5784. 2023, Avram Avinu came to Israel. Yitzchak never left Israel. Yaakov was buried in Israel. Every single grave of ours is in Israel. David HaMelech is round the corner. Ruth is in Hebron. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel's in Bethlehem. The tribes are divided all around Israel. You can go to any tribe you want and visit them in Israel. The Tanaim are buried in Israel. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yishmael, Abaya, they're buried in Hillel, Shammai, they're buried in Israel. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Tarfon, they're buried in Israel. You go to Tzipori, you can see where the Tanaim used to be. 75 years? Really? Get educated. They actually believe it. Listimatem. We started Sefer Bereshit. They told us Listimatem. And Yaakov is telling his son here, you're going to Galut. Don't forget your roots. Your roots are here. However proud you are, if you're an American, if you're English, if you're Canadian. Well, Delhi is not here at the moment, so I don't have to say Switzerland, but there is something unique about the countries we were born into. We were born into countries that at the end of the day, especially America and Canada, England also, they embraced the Jewish people. They looked after us. If we compare these countries to all of the countries we were ever in before, paradise. The way America has embraced the Jews in America is incomparable when you compare it to Poland, you compare it to Germany, you compare it to Russia, the Ukraine, Lithuania. The Germans had to hold them back. They wanted to kill the Jews before the Germans got there. There are pictures of it, horrific scenes in Kovna of people, the local people killing Jews in front of the Germans. How that is it? Lots of stories like that, but we grew up in a different place. We could make the mistake here, ladies, and we could actually think that we're American, or that we're English, or that we're Canadian. The day has always come in history where if we don't remember, they remind us. Anyone who watched the scenes at Harvard or Penn in Congress or wherever the situation would have been blown away by the inability of presidents of the best university in the world being unable to denounce genocide of Jews. Unbelievable. And it must shake the roots, the stability of anyone who thinks that this is okay. This is Ki Nashani Elokim, God has helped me forget my father's house. No. Our roots are here. That's how we started Sefer Bereshit, where we spoke about that in the very first year on Bereshit, which wasn't meant to be, right? We came together early because of the war. We were meant to be on vacation that week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and we spoke about that Rashi, right? Rashi says, you stole. Who stole? Who stole? Who stole? Muhammad went to Mecca. Who stole? What are you talking about? We bought Hebron. We bought it. It's in the Torah. We bought Hebron. They believe in the Bible, ladies. We bought Hebron. We bought Shechem. It's in this week's Parsha. And we bought Yerushalayim. We bought it. And it's not by coincidence that the Torah points out, the Tanakh points out that we bought these places. They're ours. They belong to us. They've always been ours. And they understand that if they can take this away from us, they take the roots out of the tree and the tree dies. And that's the message, Yaakov. We have many stations as Jews in our lives in the Galuyot. There's only one destination. There's only one destination. Whether you come now or later, or whatever. But it should be in our minds. There's only one place where the Jewish people belong. That's our home. And that's, every day in the Avodah in the Beit Mikdash, every single day, they used to identify dawn by looking towards Hebron. And in a book that I saw, that I wrote as follows: why do they start the Avodah every day by looking at Hebron? But to live the present by looking at the past. Your roots to the past take you into the present, which takes you into the future. Deny the past, you deny your existence. You deny who you are. You can be happy, you can be proud, you can be thankful to any country you were brought up in. I loved my life in England. I did my Thanksgiving, I said thank you and goodbye. And I came home. And I came back to, this is Beit Avi, this is where Yaakov is, this is where Yosef. We have to get through the Galut. Sometimes we have to be in Galut. For whatever reason, we have to be in Galut. But never, Nashani Elokim et Beit Avi, never forget. And Ephraim and Manasseh, those who've never been here, never seen it, never felt it, they don't know, they don't understand. And they're in biggest danger of all, those unaffiliated Jews that you'll meet in every campus that you go to, who just listen to the news and believe it, because why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? Why should they be suspicious that the news is manipulating the truth? Why should they? Why would someone do that? Why would someone do that? But that's a reality that we've seen. I want to finish just with one thing and take you into Sefer Shemot with this one thing. I mentioned it to you before, but I'll mention it again in this context. The lesson here today, ladies, is only one lesson. Never forget who you are. Never forget who you are. Be proud of who you are. You have an inheritance, a heritage of thousands of years. You belong to the most antique and good people ever to have existed. Our soldiers are risking their lives by the minute fighting a war that no other military organization would fight this way, ever. They wouldn't go by house to house. They wouldn't be taking old women out of houses who've been left behind. I know because I've heard from soldiers who did it. Old women who've been left behind in their houses by their family who ran away. And our soldiers are taking them out and looking after them. You heard of a soldier who walked into a house and broke a television by accident and they left money there? Left money to pay for it? The Marines do that? The Marines do that? Soldier, his gun accidentally broke a screen. He left money in the lounge to pay for the screen. You heard of a Marine that ever did that? That's our people. That's the people that you belong to. That's the flag that you belong to. That's your flag. That flag, that's the flag that we belong to. I want to tell you one final thing. Moshe Rabbeinu is the same story, right? He's in Galus. And Moshe is also a prince of Egypt. That's what Steven Spielberg said, but he wasn't. The Midrash says he was a prince of Egypt. And remember this, I said to you once. Moshe goes out one day and he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew. What does the pasuk say? He looks this way, that way, there's no one. And then he kills the Egyptian. What's the pshat? The pshat is that he wanted to save the Jew. He looked to see whether anyone was looking. He kills the Egyptian. My Rebbe Rabbi Mercy says something phenomenal here. Moshe goes out there. He's an Egyptian prince. He's dressed like a prince. He sees a Jew being beaten. He knows he's a Jew because he was brought up by Yocheved. He looks inside. Am I an Egyptian or am I a Jew? I'm nothing. I can't be both. You can't be both. You have to decide. He looks inside. There's no one here. Am I an Egyptian or a Jew? And he killed the Egyptian. At that moment, he decided to be a Jew. That is unbelievable Torah. He said, what am I? What am I? This is a question that we end up asking ourselves, right? I believe, I don't know, not been there. It's going to be very interesting for me when I go to visit and interview, to ask people how they feel, people who feel safe, people who feel at home, people who feel secure. Suddenly everything's shaky. Because suddenly people they believe in, they're not talking about the rabble, they're not talking about the Ku Klux Klan, they're talking about the academics, they're talking about real people, the intellectuals, the liberals. Suddenly they're questioning. Suddenly the younger generation, it's not the older generation, the older generation knows exactly what bad is, but the younger generation who would take all these lesbians and homosexuals who are walking with Hamas, I wonder whether they know what Hamas will do to them. I wonder whether they know what Hamas thinks about lesbians and homosexuals. It's not hard to find out. Not hard to find out how liberal Hamas is. It's all there. It's all written. They don't hide what they do, just as Hitler never hid what he wrote. He wrote Mein Kampf in 1923. Just no one believed him. And in the end, 50 million people died. So we thought, and we sometimes live in that reality where we think we can live in both worlds. I can be this and I can be that. But you can't be both. Then you realize there's a person here. I have to decide. I decided a long time ago with absolute pride and absolute fulfillment and contentness of which way I wanted to go. But it is a decision that every Jew has to make. And unfortunately, sometimes when we don't make it, they make it for us. I call it stations and destinations because we do have many stations. We go to many different places and we need to. Sometimes reality forces us. Yaakov was forced to go to Egypt. And he stayed there. He didn't come back straight away. Theoretically, he could have gone there, got the food and gone back, right? He didn't have to stay there. But reality meant that he had to stay there. And we got caught down there. There are stations. We have to know, ladies, how to survive in these stations. We have to know how to remain Jewish with our heads high in these stations. And we also have to know that there's only one destination. There's only one destination. Dedicated to you. Thank you.